In 1994, the University of Indiana, which has a center on their campus that looks at the role of history in American culture, did a massive study. And of course, one of the places that they wanted to look was in the schoolhouse. And so they put together a poll, put it out in the field for a national sample. And one of the questions that they posed was for the respondents to pick one word that best described their experience in history class. They didn't give them a word bank. They allowed the respondents to generate their own choices. And boring was the single most frequently offered term. The other ones that were offered were mostly synonyms of boring. There were very few positive responses. And this is scary because the one place that we can guarantee that a child will encounter history is where? It's in school. Our students, in the one place where they're going to learn history, are utterly disengaged. They see no connection, no interest. And so it leaves what I call the Bermuda Triangle of history. We have been teaching it the same way for over 100 years. We're generating the exact same results, and many of our constituents find it boring. And the question is, how do we go about busting out of this Bermuda Triangle in history? And what I discovered is that, well, my argument is that if our methodology, if our teaching and student engagement is the problem, what's the way forward? How do we solve this particular issue? And what I discovered back in the early 1990s was that there was already a growing body of research on how students learn history. And when I started to wade in, I found something interesting. The first book I read was the one on the right-hand side. It's called Thinking Historically by Thomas Holt. I picked it first because it was thin. It's about 110 pages. And I started to wade in, and I was really skeptical. Thomas Holt was a PhD historian, and he was writing about his graduate seminars at the University of Chicago. And I thought, I'm not a PhD, and I'm certainly not teaching graduate students at the University of Chicago. But as I went in, he described a problem. And his problem was that his students weren't engaged in the study of the past. That he was frustrated that he had these bright, bright kids who felt that history was simply figuring out what the professor needed to know, giving it back to him, and moving on. That they felt no connection to it. And then I picked up the book on the top left, In Search of America's Past. And this was a book written by Bruce Van Sledwright, who was a middle school teacher for 15 or 16 years, chickened out, got his PhD, moved on to the academy. But he went into a Title I elementary school, and he started to work with students in the elementary school with history. And the kids were disengaged. And what I realized is that the commonality that we all shared was lack of student engagement. They couldn't find a reason or a connection to study history. Thomas Holt at the University of Chicago, Bruce Van Sledwright in a Title I elementary school in the DC suburbs were suffering the same issue. Watch this video interview with a student of mine. He has gone through my course. This is towards probably April or May of his 11th grade year. And what I'm going to ask you to do is either mentally or physically jot down any terms that he uses to describe the course or history or his experience. So you're looking for those adjectives as you go through. I've picked him for a couple of reasons. One, he's just a regular kid. I didn't teach AP US history. This is a regular student going through a regular neighborhood high school. He's not necessarily a four-year college-bound student. And in fact, he goes to a community college for 2 years and then moves on into the music industry. So he's not your typical, I want to go to the flagship state university student. He's your typical kid. And as he goes through and talks, just jot down any of those terms that he uses to describe.
I'd say, based on prior experience of the classes that I've had, they tend to be very, dull and monotonous, you're given the facts, but that's it. You're just given the dry facts. This class, it kind of breathes life into those facts. You get more of a sense of the atmosphere of the time period. And by looking, or the sources he gives us, the primary sources, you get so much more of a feel of the period, and you get a sense of vibrance from it, rather than just, this is what happened, it's set in stone, this is just black and white facts. You really start to analyze more of the gray areas of history, and you get like a more all-encompassing view of it as a whole, rather than just.
So how would you describe it?
I think, you get a feeling more of, you have a lot more power, you have a lot more responsibility, in a sense, to get this information and look at it from all angles. And I really appreciate that. You're regarded as not just, a student learning the material, you're regarded as someone who knows the material and who's going to be studying the material and learning the material. You're regarded as a historian. And I think that it makes you a lot more interested in what you're learning, because it's not just, here, you have to learn this to get a good grade and pass this test. You have to learn this because you're interested in it, and because he actually wants to listen to what you're saying. He wants to hear your perspective on it. So that gets me a lot more engaged in what's going on. I'd say it's just a lot of fun, because it's investigating. You're looking at history under more of a microscope almost. You're so much more engaged in what you're learning, and you're so much more involved. Well, when you look at it under the microscope, you see things with a more critical eye. You don't look at things, you don't accept things as just fact. You really look at context, you look at, source material, you look at why did this person say what he did? Why is this person giving this testimony? You get so much more involved in the history behind it, but also the reason behind the history.
So what words does he use to describe his experience in 11th grade U.S. history? Say it again? Fun. If you can get a kid to say it's fun, don't worry about whether he turned any work, just give him an A. What else does he use to describe? Engaged, all right. So, all-encompassing, vibrant. Okay, definitely sense of ownership or responsibility. He appreciates. Critical eye as he looks at history. Okay, student as a historian. Engaged and involved. All right, investigating. What his interview reveals is what the research in England began to reveal in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Students were interested in history if they saw a place for themselves in doing it. And the easiest way that I can kind of compare that is if you think about mathematics class. If we taught mathematics the way we currently teach history, we would have a student go into math class and we would teach them the answer to question 1, we would teach them the answer to question 2, and we'd teach them the answer to question 3. And then on the next day, when they came back in, if they could tell us the answer to question 1, the answer to question 2, and the answer to question 3, we would say that they know how to do math. But do they? They don't. They haven't done anything. And that's the secret that the research has discovered, is that our discipline has hidden from students how we do our discipline and how they connect to it. There are 3 things that are key, but one of which is that much of what resonates with students is very, very parallel to what historians do. What do historians actually do?
That's part of it, is having a question and trying to find the answers to that question.
But the question is, what do historians do?
Yeah.
That's what I think they do, is they set out to answer a question, find the answers to their question during a time period.
So how do you do that? How do you teach the primary sources as a historian when we're covering 300 plus years? How many times do you do that?
What do historians do over the course of their regular day? They've had that second cup of coffee, they're headed out to start their day. What do historians do? Record, discover, and what kind of things? Okay, what happened, cause, effect, those sorts of things. Preserve, in what way?
By keeping it updated, keeping students updated, things like that.
And they can actually do physical preservation with artifacts, materials that they could display. It's what gives us museums. What else do historians do? Okay. They do research, they look at primary source documents. What else do historians do? Okay, so they want to understand how the past informed situations that are taking place today. How did history unfold to lead us to certain situations that we face in the current world? What else do historians do? All right, different points of view, different perspectives, definitely. And discuss is a nice word. What do they really do? They argue. Okay, yeah, they're looking for patterns, things that have developed over time. Any others?
A lot of times, if we're trying to look at it from a 2016 time period, and we have to look at the proper time and place and the perspectives of the people that we're talking about. So I think they try to nail it down to that particular group of people and particular time period.
So they want you to understand the past from the lens of the past and not necessarily looking back with our values. If we look to put at the center of instruction what historians do, kids find value. They find a place for themselves. In the words of my students, they feel empowered. It's just like mathematics. We don't give them the answers in mathematics. We make them find the answers. And we teach them how to go from problem to solution.